Hey, this is Brent. Thanks for tuning in today. Before we get started, I want to let you know that I just recently finished recording my new audio course called Boundaries That Stick: 5 Reasons Why Your Boundaries Don't Work and What to Do About It. It hasn't been officially released yet, but you can get it right now at a special pre-release discount. So head on over to brentpeak.com and sign up for Boundaries That Stick during this pre-release phase. And for just a few more days, you'll be able to get the course at a huge discount. And in addition, get a free upgrade to some special coaching from me. I want to get your feedback. So go to brentpeak.com, sign up for Boundaries That Stick, and let's get together and help you with your boundaries. Welcome to the Empowered Serenity Podcast. I'm Brent Peak, a licensed professional counselor and therapeutic coach. Are you ready to reclaim your self-worth, reduce stress, and build stronger, healthier relationships? Then you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll dive into practical strategies and heartfelt insights designed to help you cultivate inner peace and live a more empowered, balanced life. That's the journey we're on together. From emotional healing to transformative connections, we'll explore a variety of topics to support you on your path to true empowerment and serenity. Join me on this journey to deep emotional healing and discover the peace and strength within you. Welcome back. Today, we are going to talk about the most important boundary you probably haven't heard of. But first, let's imagine a story. I want you to imagine that you are at a family reunion. You are excited to catch up with relatives you haven't seen in a while, but there's one family member who always manages to bring everyone down. They're loud, toxic, and every interaction with them leaves you feeling drained and anxious. You can't just leave the reunion or avoid them entirely. Does that sound familiar? We've all been there, stuck in situations where the stress is too much and we can't easily escape. Maybe at a family gathering, at work, or even in your own home. It's in these moments that knowing how to protect our emotional well-being becomes crucial. Now, this is when many experts will talk about how to set external boundaries with other people. And that's important. That is something that many people do struggle with and is probably the most common boundary issue that gets addressed. But sometimes you can't always expect someone else to do what you might want them to do, nor can you easily just walk out of the situation. Those would be external boundaries, and they might be appropriate, but they're not always practical or viable. So today, we're going to dive into a boundary that not many people talk about, and that is your internal boundary or your psychological boundary. While external boundaries are important, mastering your inner world with that internal boundary can be even more critical to managing stress and maintaining your emotional and mental well-being. Now, don't get me wrong, external boundaries are necessary. Those are going to be the limits that we set on our environment to protect ourselves. That might include creating physical distance, where we take a break from a stressful environment. It might include managing or limiting your time, setting specific times when you will engage in certain activities or engage with certain people. You might say, I've got 5 minutes for you, because you know that around the 7 or 8 minute point, that other person's going to start complaining and getting toxic. Another external boundary might be controlling your communication with certain people, limiting the interactions. Maybe you're not going to be available for a live conversation, but you'll say, send me a text or an email and I will respond in an appropriate time frame. These are all different ways that we can set external boundaries to limit our contact with other people that might be toxic or might just not be very helpful to us. External boundaries are crucial when your surroundings are too demanding. For instance, if a toxic family member is making that reunion unbearable, you might need to step away for a few minutes, or limit your interactions with them in one of the ways that we talked about. It might mean just slipping away to the bathroom for a minute and crying, laughing, or scrolling TikTok for a while. It's important to recognize when you need those external boundaries to maintain your sanity. But let's be real. Sometimes external boundaries simply aren't going to be possible. You can't always leave the reunion, walk out of a meeting with a boss who's being demanding or verbally abusive. While you always do have choices and you can ultimately choose to limit even those situations right there, it's just not always practical. And that is when your internal boundary comes into play. Internal boundaries help you manage your reactions to external stressors. They act as a filter for what's coming in through your senses. You see somebody do something, you hear somebody say something, and the meaning of it and how you interpret it or what you assume they meant by it is a bit frustrating, overwhelming, fearful, sad, whatever the difficult emotion is. And when you're in a situation where it's a bit harder to set an external boundary, or out of necessity, you simply choose not to leave, then you're going to have to make sure that that internal boundary is strong. Now, there's two ways to strengthen your internal boundary: your emotions and your thoughts. Let's start with the emotions. You have heard probably ad nauseum people talk about different ways to regulate your emotions, coping strategies, calming skills. And by the way, don't tell someone else they need to calm down. I love the meme that I've seen on social media that says, never in the history of calm down has telling someone to calm down actually helped them to calm down. This is something that only you can do for yourself. You know what it feels like when someone tells you to calm down. It feels condescending. They're talking down to you. So don't do that to other people. But you do need to take control of the intensity going on inside of you. Your nervous system's getting ramped up with some difficult emotions. You need strategies to be able to address that. And it can't always be just walking away from a situation. So the first way that you can manage your emotional regulation, coping strategies here to consider, would be a mindfulness practice. In fact, mindful meditation has been found to be as effective as therapy and medication in treating depression, anxiety, and other mood disorders, overwhelming emotional issues for clients in therapy. So a mindfulness or meditation practice can be very helpful to you. When you engage in a practice like that, it will help you stay in the present with calm emotions. And people that do this regularly end up developing a more calmer baseline, so that when something does come up that's a bit disruptive and overwhelming, they are not as affected by it as other people. So if you want to build that kind of emotional resilience, then mindfulness and meditation is one of the best things that you can do. But there are other quick calming tips out there. Probably the easiest one to do, and I think the first best thing to do whenever you're feeling overwhelmed, is to take a slow, deep breath. Now, if you Google it or you get on YouTube and look it up, you will find all kinds of different breathing practices. But know this, that anytime you simply engage in conscious breathing that is slow and deep, you are going to let that fight or flight part of your brain know that it is okay to calm a bit here, to let the nervous system dial down just a bit. So breathing exercises is one of the first best things that you can do. Number 3, to manage your emotions, practice some self-compassion. Be kind to yourself and acknowledge your feelings without judgment. It is okay to be stressed. I tell my clients all the time, it makes absolute sense to me that you don't like that situation, that you're frustrated with what that person just said to you. It makes sense. It is understandable. And Many of us, we do a decent enough job of acknowledging that with other people, but we don't really do a good job of it with ourselves. That is a piece of self-compassion. Self-compassion, basically talking to yourself like you would a good friend or even a child. Be patient with yourself like you would be patient with a child. Because frankly, a lot of times when situations like this come up where you really need these boundaries, the way you're reacting to it in the moment, that internal reaction and response, is probably based on some really old patterns that go way back in your life to some unmet needs of childhood. So have some self compassion for yourself, just like you would for a child that you care about. So, emotional regulation strategies. We want to be able to calm, dial down that nervous system. Mindfulness practices, breathing practices, self compassion. Google some other quick calming tips for yourself. There's a lot of good resources out there for that. By the way, you can go back to episode 4 of the podcast and catch a calming mindfulness exercise that I shared with you there called Serenity in 7. That is a mindfulness practice that I first experienced and learned from a pain specialist who taught that to his clients. And it was one of the most powerful, brief, calming exercises I have experienced. And so I share that with you in episode 4. So go back and take a look at that. But in addition to the emotional strategies, I also want you to challenge how you're thinking about the situation, emotions and thoughts. So cognitive strategies, what a therapist would call cognitive restructuring. How can I reframe how I'm thinking about the situation in a way that is still realistic, but more hopeful? You always have the opportunity to change the way you interpret a situation. And instead of seeing a difficult experience or a toxic comment as something that personally attacks or affects you, we can view it as a reflection of what someone else is going through, a reflection of the current circumstances for other people, and not let their experience dictate what our inner experience ought to be. You can always reframe. You can always, and I say this to my clients all the time, hold your thoughts lightly. I've mentioned this before in the podcast and in other courses that I've done. I love the Ted Lasso quote. And if you don't watch Ted Lasso, go watch Ted Lasso. That's your homework. There's a line in the first season where he says, "Be curious, not judgmental." When you hold your thoughts lightly, you're putting that principle into practice. You're saying, okay, things don't look great right now, but I'm not going to draw any conclusions from this. I'm going to hold my thoughts lightly. I'm going to hope that my worst possible fears about this are wrong. And sometimes your worst possible fears are accurate. And when they are, then I want you to hold your worst possible fears about it being accurate lightly. In other words, if something does go the worst way that you thought it would, don't assume that the impact on you is going to be as bad as you fear it would be. The truth is, we humans have figured out how to get through some really tough situations, and they are not fun, but we do get through them. We learn to heal and grow through difficult situations. You have been through some things that as you headed into it, you thought it was going to be the worst thing ever, that was going to alter dramatically and in a negative way the rest of your life. And don't get me wrong, some things do. But 9 times out of 10, our worst fears, our worst assumptions about the impact of something going wrong isn't accurate. And it's important for you to hold your thoughts lightly when that happens. Make sure that you are not just jumping to the worst possible conclusions. I used to work for a guy who loved to say that given a lack of information, people will connect the dots in the most pathological way possible. And that is true. Our brain is wired to go negative in order to avert a bad situation. But 9 times out of 10, the things that we are most worried about don't go the way we think they will. So hold your thoughts lightly, realize that you could be wrong, and use a practice that I tell a lot of my clients to use. However, come up with a however statement. A however statement is where you share the bad news first. Like, this is a really bad situation. This is really awful. I don't like what this person just said. I don't know how we're going to get through this. Say all the negative stuff and put all that on the left side of the page. And then write the word however in big letters down the middle. And then on the right side, well, you figure out what to put there. If you can't think of anything, then just put, I could be wrong. This seems like a really bad situation. I don't know how we're going to get through this. I'm not sure we ever will. However, I could be wrong. Now, you can probably do better than that. You can probably come up with some balancing information that will help you see the situation more holistically, and I think more realistically. I am not talking about positive pie in the sky thinking that just ignores anything bad that ever happens to us. I am not talking about that. But I think that more often we err on the side of our negative thoughts at the expense of reality than we do with our positive thoughts. Because again, 9 times out of 10, the worst things that we worry about don't actually go that way or don't end up being as bad as we think. So reframe your thoughts. Use those however statements to hold your thoughts lightly and have a more balanced perspective. And by the way, if you do the emotional strategies first, that'll help your cognitive brain engage so that you can do the thinking part more easily. So these are the two sides of the coin at being able to develop your internal boundary. Your internal boundary is fueled and strengthened as you learn to regulate your emotions and have more balanced thinking about the situation at hand. Now, you've got external boundaries, you've got internal boundaries that are strengthened by your emotional regulation and your cognitive strategies. But I want to give you a tool so that you can kind of have a sense of which way to go with it. Is this a situation where I need to work on an internal boundary and just deal with whatever's going on out there? Or is this a situation where I need to set an external boundary and create some distance between me and that person or that situation? So there's a tool that I teach my clients to use for this, and I'm calling it the Overwhelm gauge. Now, I wish I could sell this on Amazon, but I can't. So you're just going to have to imagine this. I want you to imagine that there is one of those old time air pressure gauges with a needle on it that goes from 0 to 10. And I want you, when you are feeling overwhelmed by a difficult emotion, it might be anger, it might be sadness, it might be fear, it might be shame or embarrassment or guilt, whatever it is, if it's a difficult, uncomfortable emotion that is overwhelming you, I want you to rate it on a scale of 0 to 10. Now, this is somewhat subjective, but if it's in the 0 to 4 range, you're doing pretty good. Your internal boundaries are handling things well, and you probably don't need any external boundaries at that point. But I would say that when it's getting in the 5, 6, or 7 range, you need to take a second look at your internal boundaries. How are they doing? Do you need to do an emotional calming strategy? Do you need to take a few deep breaths? Do you need to challenge some of your negative thoughts about the situation? At a 5, 6, or a 7, you're probably not at the point where you need to say, hey, I'm going to have to step out. I don't think there's a need yet for an external boundary, but you probably want to shore up your internal boundaries there. Now, if it is 7, 8 or higher, and we'll say 7-ish or higher, and definitely by the time you're in a 9 or a 10 range, when you're up at that point, you are in a full-blown fight or flight response. You are probably going to say something you regret, and that internal boundary just isn't going to be very accessible to you. You need to take some space. You need to put some space between you and whatever the situation is, or the person, if at all possible, and put an external boundary in place. Step out and just say, look, I'm not feeling like I'm going to handle this well. I need to take some space. I will check back in with you again. Be responsible about it. Don't just, slam the front door, peel out of the driveway and you're gone for the next 5 hours. But let the person know, hey, I don't trust myself right now to handle this well. I'm going to go cool off and I'll check back in with you in a half hour. If that needle is up there, then you probably need to do something like that. But when you do that, make sure it's for the purpose of working on the internal boundary. Do something to calm your emotions, challenge your thoughts, come up with a good however statement. And then once you've got that needle back down into a decent range, I would say 5 or less, then come back and reassess the external boundary and see about reconnecting with that person again and picking up the conversation or whatever comes next. Okay. So this is a tool that you can use, an overwhelm gauge. And I hope that you will just imagine that anytime you're feeling overwhelmed and use it to discern for yourself, do I need an internal boundary? Do I need an external boundary? By the way, if you engage in a breathing exercise to help calm your emotional state, your nervous system down, picture the gauge, just close your eyes, picture the gauge, and every time you exhale slowly and completely, and you let your shoulders drop. You let your body relax with each exhale. And on every exhale, I want you to picture that needle on that overwhelm gauge dropping just a little bit each time. Don't let the needle get ahead of how you're actually feeling, but it always needs to move just a little bit. And that will be a good cue for you to know how your nervous system is doing and when it's back down into a range where it might not be as imperative to have that external boundary. Okay. So use that gauge as a tool to help you assess the situation, but also to give you some feedback in your mind on how you're doing. Now, internal boundaries versus external boundaries. Some people are too quick to go to the external boundary. Oh, I'm overwhelmed. I'm out of here. And they need to work on their internal boundary so that they're not having to separate themselves so often. If you feel like you always have to put up those kind of walls with people, and by the way, a wall can be a dysfunctional form of a boundary. All right. When you're taking some really serious space from somebody, that's more of a wall than a boundary. And that is very needed with people who simply don't respect your boundaries. If it is someone that crosses the line and abuses their space in your life, then you have every right to put up a wall. Don't get me wrong. But if you find yourself putting up a wall all the time because you are constantly overwhelmed internally, then you need more than just those external boundaries. You need an internal boundary. And go back and start using some of those emotional regulation skills and start challenging those thoughts that seem to be those worst possible conclusions about what's going on. So I understand that setting boundaries, whether internal or external, is easier said than done. But remember, you always have a choice. And if you want to have more of a choice, more empowerment in any of these types of situations that we're talking about, that internal boundary that can filter out not just what you're hearing from the other person, but filter out some of your most negative thoughts from the core of who you are, that will give you the power to be okay. And okay is a very relative word, I get it, but I want you to have that resilience, and that internal boundary will help you do that. So that even when you can't make an immediate change with an external boundary, you can start working towards creating an environment that supports your well-being from the inside out, instead of always having to focus on the external environment to help you feel better. Mastering internal boundaries is a powerful way to protect your emotional well-being when you're feeling overwhelmed. And by using these strategies, you can create an internal filter that helps you process that external stimuli in a healthy way. So when you couple that internal boundary with appropriate external boundaries, you can ensure that you are able to navigate life's challenges with resilience and grace. Now, I do want to take a moment and put in a little plug for a new course that I'm working on. I have an audio course I finished recording called Boundaries That Stick: 5 Reasons Why Your Boundaries Don't Work and What to Do About It. And in that course, it's a short course. It's a little less than 2 hours of content, and you can listen to it at 1.5 speed or double speed. The cool thing about it is that I give it to you when you buy it. I give it to you as a private podcast feed, so you can listen to it wherever you want to. But it goes into the 5 most common boundary traps that keep your boundaries from being effective. And then I give you some practical strategies to help you with that. So go back and listen to this lesson again, then go to brentpeak.com and sign up for Boundaries That Stick. You'll have immediate access to the audio of that. And as of this recording, we're actually in the pre-release phase of Boundaries That Stick, so I haven't fully released it yet. So for the first few folks who sign up, and I'll probably close this pretty soon, but for the first few folks that sign up within the week of the release of this, you're going to get some free group coaching and on-call coaching from me through the Voxer app. So I want to get some feedback on the course before I release the final version. So great opportunity for you. Get the course at a discount, lowest price it's ever going to be, and get free coaching from me along with it. You matter. You are worthy of feeling safe, feeling emotionally safe in all of your relationships. So best way to do that is to work on those internal boundaries and those external boundaries so that you can feel at ease in the relationships that matter most to you. So feel free to rewind and listen to this again, and then go sign up for Boundaries That Stick. Thank you for listening today. I will see you next time on the Empowered Serenity Podcast. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Empowered Serenity Podcast. I hope our conversation today has inspired you to embrace your journey toward deeper emotional healing, empowerment, and inner peace. Be sure to check the show notes for any resources that may have been mentioned in this episode. And don't forget to visit brentpeak.com for additional resources and information about working with me. If you found value in our discussion, please share this podcast with others who might benefit, and consider subscribing and leaving a review. Your feedback helps us reach more people seeking transformative change. And remember, the path to empowered serenity is a journey, and you're not alone. Until next time, take care and keep moving forward with hope and resilience. The information provided in the Empowered Serenity Podcast is for educational and informational purposes only, and is not intended as a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental health concerns. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. If you are experiencing a crisis, please contact your local emergency services or seek immediate help from a mental health professional. The views expressed by guests on the podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Brent Peak or North Valley Therapy Services.